Chapter 35, March 13th, 1943, Warsaw Ghetto. The radio I brought into the ghetto was one of the few that existed here, but every night, if I wasn't assigned elsewhere, I sat with Yitzhak and Esther and Tamir and anyone else who could crowd together to listen for news from the larger world. If nothing else was available, we tuned into the German propaganda reports, although little of what they said could be believed. More often we listened to an underground broadcast from London that originated with a Polish woman somewhere here in Warsaw. Not everything that came through her broadcast could be believed either. Most of what she said was clearly designed to mislead the Germans, who obviously must monitor the station. Though what we heard tonight seemed far too accurate. Our network in Krakow confirms the liquidation of the Portgos ghetto is underway, the woman said. 2,000 Jews deemed unfit for work were ordered onto the streets and shot. My mother was unfit for work, and my father refused to leave her side. 2,000 Jews had been shot. My vision blurred, and time slowed as if the universe knew I needed to absorb every word. 2,000. How could I possibly take that in? I couldn't even think. Beside me, Esther held my hand, and maybe she was squeezing it, maybe speaking to me. I didn't know. On my right, Yitzhak was frozen in place. I wasn't sure if he was even breathing. Was I? The announcer continued. The remaining 8,000 Jews are being sent to Auschwitz or marched to the nearby Plasnow labor camp, led by Aman Goeth, a man whose reputation boasts of cruelty and sadism. Little hope can remain for their fates. In other news, I jumped up and ran from the bunker, almost blinded by tears and anger. It was the "in other news" that sent my temper over the edge. How could they move on to the other news as if the fate of those 10,000 Jews was only one piece of a nightly broadcast, as if they hadn't just announced something that sent my world flying apart? Yitzhak must have followed me. He put his hands on my shoulder, and I turned around and folded myself into his arms, sobbing. I knew I was the older sister, and that I should be comforting him. But tonight it was the other way around. What did it matter if I'd known this was coming? Nothing could prepare me for actually having to deal with such awful news. Hundreds of people still lived because of my work. Why couldn't I have saved my own parents? If they were taken to the labor camp, they might still... That was all he said. That was all either of us said. Yitzhak held me until no tears were left. The last time I could cry for my parents. Nor would I hold on to any anger towards them, not for refusing to believe me when they could have, or for staying when they should have left. Instead, I would remember the best of who they were. My father, strong and kind and ever loyal to my mother. And my mother, tender and loving, and always ready with a word of advice when needed. I was proud to be their daughter, and before this war was over, I would make them proud of me as well. When I'd collected myself, we returned to the bunker to find Tamir and Rachel in close conversation with Esther. She looked over at me with tremendous sadness in her eyes and shook her head. I knew what that meant. "No," I shouted, indifferent to whether the entire ghetto heard, much less the people in this bunker. "No, you will not do this." Yitzhak grabbed my arm, holding me back. I was here when my father posted those lists. You have to understand, when her father posted those lists, you have to understand that is not her fault. I was still shouting. If we accept that all Germans are not Nazis and all Poles are not against us, then why can we not accept that Esther is not her father? He did what he did, and those were his choices and no one else's. If Esther wants to stay, then she must stay. We have a place she can go, Rachel said. Maybe it's better. Ignoring her, I turned to Esther. What do you want? Her answer came immediately. I am supposed to be here in the ghetto, and I want to stay here. Then she spoke more loudly to the whole group. And if you allow me to stay, I promise to prove that I am as much a part of this resistance as any of you. I will fight. I looked them over, my expression as serious as before. And if you make her go, then I promise that I will not fight. I will leave with her, and you will have 2 fewer members for the coming battle. 3. Yitzhak stood at my side with his arm around me. And suddenly I loved my dear brother more than ever. I loved Esther too, truly loved her, as if she were my own sister. Tamir and Rachel exchanged glances. Then, in a softer tone, Rachel said, You may stay if you wish, Esther, but you will have to prove yourself to the others. I cannot do that for you, nor can your friends. I will. When we were alone again, I pulled her into a hug, and she thanked me, though I'd certainly done her no favors. She whispered, Does this mean you forgive me for loads? Do you trust me again? I wish I could give her an easy answer. I'd forgiven her a long time ago, but trusting her was very different. I held her hand and said, Tell me the truth about the package you were supposed to deliver. It's okay to admit that there was never a package. There is, Shia, I promise. What is it? At least tell me that. I can't. I've promised not to say anything until the right time. She lowered her eyes. I'll deliver it when it's needed most. And that's not yet? No, not yet. She still wouldn't look at me. What package could she possibly have that was such a secret? Over the next several days, I became aware of a strange incongruency within the ghetto. People seemed happy, wearing easy smiles and waving with friendly hellos, as they would have done before the war. They were, in fact, entirely out of step with anyone I'd met in Poland since the war began, and particularly in the ghettos. We were hungry, of course. We had no idea how long our meager food supplies would last, and so rations were imposed that were nearly as strict as what they were under the control of the Judenrat. We were exhausted. If I wasn't digging a bunker somewhere, then I was stocking it with supplies gathered from elsewhere in the ghetto. Not only food, water, and weapons, but blankets, clothing, and books for those who would be confined here while the fighting took place on the streets. And if I wasn't working on a bunker, then I was building handmade weapons. We made Molotov cocktails, filling glass jars, and even light bulbs with sulfuric acid, bleach, or whatever else we could find that would either burn or explode. We sharpened the edges of sticks or flattened them into handles, which our welders fashioned into knives. Every item we found in our exploration of the apartments was considered for its possibility as a weapon. A broom handle, a rolling pin, or a pair of scissors, knitting needles, wiring from the walls, and certainly every tool from the workshop. I thought Esther could sense people knew about her father. Few people talked to her, and those who did were soon pulled aside by others for a hushed conversation, and then Esther was left alone again. Each day her shoulders slumped further, and her eyes remained longer on the ground. She was, in fact, the only person I saw who looked the way I expected everyone here to look. Even I found myself smiling more than usual, sometimes laughing as I worked among other resistance members, and eventually I understood why. It was because the ending of our story was already written. We knew what was coming and that it would happen soon, and that even at our best, most of us would never walk away from this ghetto, if any did. In the knowing, there was peace, and with our action came joy. Finally, after years of endurance and suffering and the pain of having our lives stripped away from us one piece at a time, At last we had something that restored our dignity and pride and our common feeling that this was the moment when we would make a stand. That time was coming, probably sooner than any of us knew. Until then, I had work to do. Chapter 36, April 18th, 1943, Warsaw Ghetto. Another month passed with the same routine. The snow had melted away, and warmer days brought hope for a better future. A cruel tease, considering our circumstances. I'd never experienced a springtime such as this one. It had been 3 months since the Germans last attempted to enter this ghetto, and almost 2 months since we'd arrived. In all that time, we discussed theories, debated options, and considered opinions from everyone who claimed to understand what the Germans were thinking. But no one really knew. And for 3 months, the only thing that truly mattered was that every day they waited, we improved another bunker, created more weapons, and solicited help from the outside world. Every day gave us another few hours to live, to tell ourselves that anywhere the Germans didn't dare to go, there we were, free. Zob leadership divided the ghetto into 3 separate zones, each led by a different commander. Other resistance groups were here too, some divided by political beliefs, others by location, but all of us united with one purpose, to make a final stand with honor and dignity. We were joined by several people emerging from the wild with offers to fight on their own. Wherever they could, however they could. It was nearly impossible to travel from one zone to another because they were separated by German patrolled areas. After the fighting began, we would have little idea in one zone what was happening in the other 2. In that time, we dug or built over 600 bunkers. Their locations were disguised so that only a person who knew of the entrance would be able to find it. Some were larger than others, but we scavenged from abandoned apartments to try to make each one as comfortable as possible, since they were to hold civilians who might be in here for weeks or even months. Most bunkers locked from the inside, so in the end, the Germans would have to either break in or lure us out. Many had fresh water supplies, electricity, and air vents, allowing those who were not fighting to stay in hiding for as long as a year, if they were careful. Every bakery within the ghetto had been operating nearly non-stop to create rusk bread, which, although dry and crusty, lasted far longer than regular bread. We'd acquired pistols, rifles, and at least 1 machine gun with ammunition for all calibers. We had grenades, both military and homemade devices, and hundreds of other containers that would explode when we lit them. We had several hundred pieces of armor stolen from the Germans, including steel helmets and bullet-resistant tunics. We spent a great deal of money on the black market to acquire these items, thanks to the Judenrat treasures, which the resistance was happy to take for itself. But as I looked over what we did have, I couldn't help but think that this wasn't nearly enough. I remembered the cafe, how quickly we went through our supplies, how much it took for what little we accomplished. We also didn't have support from the outside world, not like we needed. How many times had our leaders begged the Polish underground army to join us? With their help, we'd have a chance to bring a fight to the Nazis that could make a difference, maybe even turn the tide within Warsaw. They gave us a few weapons and a symbolic pat on the back for good luck, but that too was inadequate. Then one evening, after 3 months of preparation, 3 months of wondering and planning and hoping for even 1 day more, a man I knew, only a sham, burst into our bunker in the central zone, his eyes wide with fear and only 2 words on his lips. They're here. The Germans had come. Just like that, the last of the sand ran through the hourglass.